Hey there folks, and welcome to something a little bit different. Now, you may have seen recently that I bunged up my wrist and I couldn't paint anything. I could barely push a mouse around a mouse pad, so painting and making videos was right out of the question. Now, it's been about a week and I haven't had a paintbrush in my hand that whole time. I'm going a bit stir crazy. So the end result of that was picking up this fella here. Now, he is from Imitation of Life Miniatures, and I'll make sure that there is a link to them in the description. This fella, he's a 3D print. He's come off of my Mars 4 at home, but there are licensed Etsy sellers at the end of a quick Google. So today is not going to be a true how I paint things, because this is not me attacking something that I know how to do or am trying to demonstrate. This is literally just me having some fun. And there's one or two tricks along the way that you might find interesting yourself, but all the same, I thought it would be useful for me to get behind the camera and kind of get running again with my wrist. So yeah, stick around. All of the paints for this one will be listed in the description, the same as always. Let's get started. Now, once your miniature is all cleaned up and assembled, it's time to prime him. Now, I've used here, this is Beastie Brown from Vallejo, and it's quite similar to Mournfang Brown in color and tone. I really like it because it's got a little hint of red to it, so it's going to work quite well for a rusty kind of base. I recommend, you could start from black, but you're going to get a very stark and sharp finish then. If you do start from black, maybe a couple of thin coats of Mournfang Brown over the top to bring it up to something similar to this will work. It will work, but it's a little bit of extra effort on your part. If you have got access to the color primers from Vallejo or anything even vaguely similar, a mid-tone brown is going to work perfectly for what we've got in mind. Now, for our first step, what I've got is a big soft makeup brush. You could also use a dry brush from any particular set. It's not going to matter too much. What I have is some plate mail metal from the Army Painter. We're going to quite generously overbrush this over the entire miniature. And don't worry if you get into the recesses with this, because when we come to shade it, we're going to dull quite a lot of this down anyhow. What I want is to make most of him metal, but any bits that we end up with a little bit of the brown showing through will work perfectly. Now I'm using this very soft brush, and you'll see I'm actually being quite careful with it, because this fella being resin and having quite some delicate joints, I don't want to have to try and re-glue his hands or anything if they pop off. Same would be true of any metal miniatures, just take your time. Now once that has dried and settled, I think you'll get a feel for what a difference a black primer would make there. That's a couple of brushes over those areas, works pretty well to my eyes. What I'm going to do now is add a couple of different metallic colors just to break up some of the monotony here. What I'm going to start with is Weapon Bronze, and anywhere that I want to look kind of brassy, just a quick blast of this will do the job. So I'm going to paint the trim on this funky gun thing, because it looks like a minigun, but the actual barrels are like the size of the rounds he's got strapped across his chest, so I kind of like the idea of it being this break-open revolver thing he's actually got on his hand there. Other areas that might work well, let's do this little grill on the back here. I want to add just a little bit of visual interest without him going like full steampunk, too much brass. All the same, when you're painting yours or something similar, you can have as much fun with this color as you like. Now see, I haven't added very much there. I think too much, and it's going to start overpowering the silver, especially when we add the casing color over top. Now the bullets that he's got strapped to his gun belt, I've already done with a little bit of that bronze, but I am going to go back here with some greedy gold and just dot them again. I'm doing this now because, as you can see, obviously they're little tiny things, and I'm quite likely to make a mess. So if I do them at this point, when I come to paint in the leather, it'll be much easier to tidy up. So what I've got now, this is one of my little cheap synthetic brushes, comes from the stationery aisle, so I do not mind at all if I ruin it. What I'm going to do is pop him to the side for a second. You see this doesn't come to a perfect tip. I'm going to smear it out a little bit, just press it into my desk until I get a slightly rougher tip. Then dip it into some Aqua Alchemy. And if you're familiar with the Venture Brothers, you probably, you're going to get an idea of where the inspiration for this color scheme is coming from. Then we're going to start stippling this fairly roughly over the panels that I want to be this color. Now, as I come up to the edge of some of them, what I'm going to do is leave a little bit of that silver showing. I don't want a perfect edge. As well, I can probably leave a little bit of the front piece showing, but that's what I'm going to do. So his legs, a couple of sections on his hands are probably going to get this as well. I don't know, I'll have a look what looks good. But you see just a little bit of paint on my brush, and those bristles all spread and mangled. This is going to help me get a nice textured stippling effect for this casing color. I love how with one color choice he's gone from like sinister B-movie robot villain to demented household appliance. I love that color so much, and it just suits him to a T. What I'm going to paint in now is the leather details that he's wearing. Let's get a little bit more serious again. This is too much fun. What we're going to use for this is oak brown. Now the reason here is I want a nice deep brown that's not going to look too much like our primer. I could use Mournfang brown or similar, but I think a darker color is going to make this stand out a little bit more and will suit the overall look. So over his equipment pouches and his bandolier. Now flipping him around, this braided cable that he's got on his gun section here, I'm going to paint with Wyvern Fury. Now this is a nice deep red that just covers absolutely beautifully. What you could do as well is also paint in this cable with that. But I am instead going to use is Demonic Yellow. Now this, by contrast, is not going to cover perfectly in one go, although it does cover quite well for such a bright yellow. But that's physics at play. Yellow and red pigments behave quite differently to one another. So once this first coat is dry, I'm going to give this cable a second. Now once that's done, I think that's most of the robot finished. I might come up with a couple of other things to do later, but for now, I'm happy to move on to his base. So what I'm going to start with is deep grey, and I'm going to paint in, there are these little stony bits that he's standing on. One quick coat of this should do the job. Now I've got a slightly larger brush, and I'm going to use fur brown as the base for this kind of semi-irradiated dirt. I'm going to stipple this fairly roughly into place. I'm not too worried if I do get on some of the metallic stuff that I've already done, or on the grey bits, but I want to try and avoid those funky feet. Now what I have is gunmetal. This one here, this is the old formulation, so it's going to cover just a little bit differently than the Fanatic range, but it's really not going to matter. Now as well, I actually painted the radar dish there in the same color with that gunmetal. I kind of like the idea of the dish pointing one way, where his gun is pointing, you see, and his face is pointing the other direction. I don't know, I just thought that was cool. Anyhow, I have here, this is ancient stone, and one of my scraggly little brushes. And what I'm going to do is just lightly dry brush the entire surface of the base. Now, it will be very easy to go overboard, so take your time and make sure that you have only got a little bit on your brush at a time, because then you'll get this cool, slightly dusty effect, which is what I want. And I'm also going to pop a little bit of this over the edges of the metallic stuff that we've painted. It will barely show up, but when we shade this, it will give us a little bit of texture that we'll be able to see. So, let's finish off the base there. Now speaking of that shade, what I've done is mixed up 2 parts of Strong Tone with 1 part of Speed Paint Medium, both from the Army Painter. Now you could use a Strong Tone neat here, but I quite like using the medium to make it flow a little bit more, and that slightly more runny sort of consistency to it, I find a little easier to use. So once that's all worked together, let's jam it all over the miniature. And I always say, make sure to work it into the recesses, but this guy is like 70% recesses, so do take your time here. But yeah, over everything. Make sure that our robot gets a nice thorough, oh yuck, this is gross, nice thorough bath in this stuff. And once all of it is done, including the base, I'll pop him somewhere warm and sunny to dry if I can find one. We'll give him about half an hour for that to settle. And with a bit of luck, once he is dried, you'll have something that looks like this. Now, most of the shades I've come across on the market these days dry with a slightly shiny finish. It's not going to be a huge issue, and there are, of course, a couple of exceptions, but it can be a little difficult sometimes to work with if you can't really see 100% what you're doing. It's a matter of practice. I'm quite confident I'll be able to keep painting from here, but if you do find it difficult to see what you're doing, then just blast it with a quick matte varnish or a satin varnish if you want to keep the shininess of the metallic stuff. But speaking of the metallic stuff, what I have here is my busted little dry brush, and I have some shining silver. And I'm going to be quite sparing with this because I don't really want to make everything too shiny. So you'll see I'm just lightly tickling on the edges of areas that I want to look a little bit shinier, a little bit brighter. I'll be quite careful on the arms here. If I do accidentally hit the green, it's probably not going to matter too much. Likewise, you can also do this on the bronze, and that'll look quite cool too. So I'm going to take my time here. Let's get a look at this once I'm done. Now, truth be told, I did put on a lot more of that than I was expecting, and I think up around like the arm joint in the back here, you can probably see that. I quite like how it's turned out though. So as always, start with too little because you can decide to add more, but putting too much on to start with, well, that's a little harder to take off. What I'm going to move to now is leather brown, and what I'm going to do, once I've worked this onto my brush, just use the edge of the brush to catch the edge of these rather square, blocky surfaces. It's nice and simple to do this. There's one last detail that I want to add a little extra color to. What I've got first of all is some matte white. And let's get the right angle here where I can get into this little socket on his hand. I'm going to paint the bobble in the center because I sort of see that as being a projector. But I'm also going to splurge out a little bit around the inside, even painting over some of that brass that we've done. So adjust position as you need to be able to reach different areas. Now that doesn't need to be a perfect white, just mostly white, because what I'm going to pop in there now is a little bit of Caribbean blue, which is a speed paint. So I'm going to paint this following that same little ringlet shape and let that dry. Once that has dried, go back to the white, just a little dot of that up in the corner. Now I'm talking about a round surface and I'm mentioning the corner, but you get what I mean. Up on one side to give us a little hint of a glow. Now what I'm going to do is paint the base rim. Then I'll go ahead and take him outside, hit him with a varnish. Ordinarily I would use a matte varnish, I talk about that all the time, but today I'm going to use Munitorum varnish from Citadel because it's a satin sort of semi-gloss finish, which I think will suit our robot much better. Anyhow, let's get a look at what he looks like when he is all finished. And so there at last, our robot is complete. Now I did add a couple of tiny dots of PVA and some static grass to his base, just to add a little bit more greenery down there. I really like how that's turned out, and I had a blast. It was really fun. So whether or not anything sort of stood out to you there or was particularly useful, really this was more for me for a change of pace, but if you did find something useful there, all the better. So I'm pretty happy with having done a brown primer to start with. I think dry brushing the metallic over the top of that worked well, a lot better than it would have done over black. Yeah, he's really cool. He was a lot of fun to paint. So as always, even though this isn't technically speaking how I paint things, I do want to give a shout out to Exit 23 Games, who have made sure that my light and sound equipment are still working after all these years, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue and resin, including every single one of my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Your support is what makes this channel go. So yeah, pat yourselves on the back as well. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time and for putting up with me. You all enjoy the rest of your day.